Hey there everyone, welcome back to another Drummer Artificer Studios. It's Alex again. Today we're going to make some rivets. So for a jeweler, a rivet is considered a mechanical or a cold connection. It means that you don't use heat when joining the two pieces of metal together. It is an easy process to use, but what's really nice about mechanical or cold connections is they can be done literally anywhere. Back in January, I was actually at a convention where I participated in an art competition they had, and I made a pendant that was layers of copper that had been hammered and then riveted together with a design cut out of them. And I actually built that right there at the convention in one of the hallways so people could see what I was doing. So you can take this anywhere and you can do it anywhere. That's what's nice about mechanical connections. So in general, when you're talking about rivets, there's going to be three main types that most jewelers will use over and over, and they're the three ones that I'm going to cover today. The first one is a mushroomed rivet. That's what most people will think of. It's when you put the rivet material through your metal and you dome either end of it and create what looks like the top of a mushroom on either side of the metal. The second type is a countersunk rivet. You use countersinking rivets when you want it to be flush with the surface of the metal. So you'll take a slightly larger drill bit and you'll bore out extra material before you put your rivet in so that there's space for that rivet head to go into so that it lays flat on the top of the metal. The third one is a tube rivet, and that's usually used when you want to have some form of a hole going through your piece of metal. Either it's going to be where you're attaching a jump ring, or maybe a wire for turning into an earring, or maybe you want to use it as a joint so that the two pieces will be able to flex. But that's what you would use a tube rivet for. But like I said, I'm going to go over all three of those today. So for making rivets, there are going to be a few tools you're going to want to have. First and foremost, it's a rivet you're going to be hammering, so you're going to need a hammer and an anvil. Now, when I say anvil, I don't mean blacksmith anvil, big giant thing. You can get small jeweler anvils, but when I refer to anvil, it is simply a term that means a surface to strike on. I have two anvils that I will use for rivet making. One of them is this. It is a 4" by 4" block of steel that one side is flat so I can do rivets on it. The other side is dished, and that allows me to put sheet metal in it and shape the metal slightly so I don't just have a flat piece of metal. But you can use it on either side. I picked this up on Amazon for I think about 40 bucks. And like always, all these tools I talk about, I will have links down in the description so that if you want to take a look at them and possibly pick them up to give this a try, you can find them there. The other thing that I use a lot for rivets is simply a hammerhead that is not attached to a handle anymore. It can still be on the handle, but this makes it easier for you to use. So this one I like using because it's a chasing hammer, is the technical term for this. It's for a different process that I'll probably make a video for in a while. But what's important about it is that it has two heads on it. So on one end, you've got a flat hammer head. Now, chasing hammers can either come flat or they can come slightly domed. This one specifically has flat because I wanted a flat surface for the anvil. The other end is a ball peen. And this is used in doing the tube rivets. So it's something you'll want something like this anyway if you're doing a tube rivet. So just using a hammerhead is easy. Now you might be thinking, how the heck are you going to use this to make a rivet on? If you're using the ball end, it can just stand like that, but it will move it around on you. So the other thing that you'll need to use with that, if you're using that, is a vise. This is a small, I think it's a 2 or 3" jawed vise. I picked this one up at Menards, but you can find them all over. And all you do is you clamp this in the vise to hold it. Now you might also see that this has some giant wood contraption on it, and it's because I bought this vise to use with my portable jewelry bench. I have a new permanent one I have built, and unfortunately the clamping mouth on this is too small to fit the tabletop, so I have to go buy a new vise. So in the time being, I just made a stand to hold it. I prefer using this method opposed to the steel block, simply because it's a smaller surface and it's easier for me to get my hand around to do the riveting. So that covers your anvil surface. You will then need some form of a hammer. Now you can do it with a chasing hammer. Specifically, you'd be able to do it with the smaller peen on the back of it. But they also make a riveting hammer. They make them in different styles. This one just has two small round heads on it. One is flat, the other one is slightly domed. They also make riveting hammers that one end is a straight peen, meaning that it is tapered to almost like a chisel head, but it's rounded over. It's not actually sharp. People will use that chisel head when they start a rivet because it will help push the metal to either side as you strike it, so that it will help flare it out and set the rivet a little bit quicker. I just don't have one of those right now because I prefer using this style of hammer, but I will be eventually picking one up, and again, I'll have the links down below. The other tool that you don't necessarily need, but will come in handy, is called a tube cutter. So what it is, it's a small handle that has this contraption on it. This set screw allows you to change the depth here. And what you actually use this for is you set it to whatever depth you want your rivet to be, put your material in, and this makes it so that it's easier for you to hold your rivet material, and it's got grooves for you to put your jeweler's saw in to cut your rivet material. Makes it so that you're not sitting there trying to hold a thin piece of wire and cut your rivet and then lose your rivet as soon as you cut it. So it's not crucial. I didn't pick this up until January. I went almost 10 years in doing this without having one, but it does make the process a lot quicker and easier. So it might be recommended to try getting one. The other things that you'll need for it are pretty simple things that you'll probably already have if you do any form of work. Is some form of a center punch to mark where your rivet holes are going to be drilled, and then drill bits. This is a pack of very small drill bits. Usually when you're doing a rivet, they're only 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter, so you need very small drill bits for that. And those are pretty much all the basic essential tools that you'll need for doing rivets. So let's get started, and we're going to start with just the mushroom rivet. So for the purpose of this demo, what I'm going to be using for making the rivets are 2 pieces of 18 gauge brass. They're measured at approximately 1 inch by 1.5 inches. And what this will allow us to do as a demo is to make all 3 of our sample rivets on a single piece. So what I've done is, as you can see, I have 3 marks on this, roughly dividing it into thirds in the middle. So one will be the mushroom, the countersunk, and the tube rivet. So I'm going to start on a single piece where I have the marks. I'm going to use my center punch and just mark where the holes are all going to be. That way I know where all 3 are going to be located, and that's all taken care of. Now, because each one is going to be slightly different, I'm only going to start with drilling a single hole. So I'm going to begin with this one right here, and that will be for our mushroom rivet. So what I've done is the wire I'm using is a 14 gauge copper. Doesn't really matter what you use. I'm using copper simply because it's the color contrast against the brass. So there it is, a 14 gauge. To make sure I have the right size drill bit, I used my B&S gauge and just found a drill bit that fit the same gauge sizing. They have number codes for each of these, like a 56 or a 61 or whatever it is. I've never taken the time to learn them. I just check it every time I go to make a hole. So I've got my proper size drill bit chucked into my drill. Same as piercing, you can use whatever works to be able to drill with. This is just a nice small 12-volt drill, so it will work very well. And there we go. Now, an important thing to remember is that once you drilled through it, it's going to leave some burrs on the back side of it. So I'm just going to take a file and just hit it enough to clean those burrs off. Now what I can do is for the mushroom and the countersunk, I'm using the same size rivet. So what I will do is go ahead and drill the second one for the countersunk. Once I have both of those drilled, what I'm going to do is use my marker and mark just the one I'm working on now. You don't want to do both all the way through both pieces, because as you're setting the first rivet, if it shifts any, your holes won't line up anymore. So you only want to drill through both pieces one at a time. The top plate, if you're using all the same size rivet, you can drill all of them in the beginning. The bottom plate, you want to just do it as you set each rivet. So I've now got my first set of holes completely drilled, and I'm ready to start doing the rivet itself. So I'm going to take my tube cutter. I've already preset this to the size I need, but in figuring out what length rivet you're going to be using, what you want to do, and you can measure this with a ruler, or you can just put the wire straight through it and check it that way, is the length you want for the rivet is you want 1/2 to 3/4 the diameter of your rivet stock to be sticking out either end of your pieces. If you have too much material on either end, when you go to upset or mushroom the head of the rivet, it's just going to bend over and it will look bad. You want to have that 1/2 to 3/4 length sticking out either end so that you get a nicely formed rivet. And what I usually do is I'll just put it through like this, so I've got the little nub the right length sticking out the top. I'll look at the bottom, use my fingernail to mark the wire at the same length on the bottom, pull it off, and then that's how long I need it to be. You can then go and use a ruler and measure it so you know how long it is. Or you can mark it with a pin or something. Whatever you can do to figure out that mark, you can now then figure out your length on this. But like I said, I already have this set. So I'm going to put it in, flip this little handle over that squeezes it in place and holds it. Take my jeweler's saw. There's a groove right in here, and that is what you're measuring your length to, from the end of this plate where the wire sets up to this groove. That's the length. So I just put the saw in there. And there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 2, because both the mushroom and the countersunk rivets are going to be the same length, so I can use the same size piece of stock. I'll even for the tube rivet should be able to use the exact same size. So there we go. Here are my 2 little pieces of rivet stock. I know it's very small and hard for you to see, but they're right there. So for the next step in setting your first rivet is you have to take one of these, put it through both pieces of metal. So you can see there's a little bit sticking out on either side of that plate. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that my rivet is centered in my piece. I'm now going to rest the rivet on the anvil surface, but have the rest of the brass off of it, because I don't want the bottom to be flush to the surface of the anvil. I want it sticking out on both ends. I'm going to take my riveting hammer and just give it some gentle taps. I'm then going to flip it over and do the same thing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just setting my rivet. And that is just making sure that I get both ends slightly mushroomed out to hold it in place. The technical term for doing this is called upsetting. And upsetting is a forging term where you are taking something and by striking it, you are making it larger than it initially was. So the force of the hammer hitting that wire is squishing it down, thinking of having like a tube of Play-Doh. And you go and you just squish it down, and it expands outwards. That is upsetting. And all you're doing is you're upsetting that rivet material so that the ends flare out and get larger. As you get it set, you can start hammering harder so that it moves faster. And the other thing that you might notice I'll start to be doing as I'm hitting this is I'm not going to go straight down. I'm going to start going at an angle and kind of working my way around the hammer head or the rivet head. And that's what's going to help cause that dome surface. The other thing I'm doing, and I'll pull this out to give you an example. The other thing I'm doing is as I'm striking, I'm not going straight down. Like I said, I'm coming at an angle, but I'm also being careful and using the outside edge of the hammerhead to hit on the rivet. That way, I'm not going to be using the surface of the hammer and striking the metal, and it will help reduce the number of marks that I'm going to put on the surface of the metal. And if you listen to it, you can actually hear a distinct difference in the sound from where I'm hitting the rivet and when I'm hitting the metal, because the metal, again, is suspended off the anvil surface. So as I hit it, it will push it down and gives a slightly different sound to it. Okay, so there we have a mushroom rivet. It's slightly raised off the surface, so you can use that to create some decorative looks in a piece. So for the next one, for the countersunk, I've already got the first hole drilled. Because I now have the two pieces together, I shouldn't need to countersink that hole. I've already got something to help keep the drill bit in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and drill right where that hole is. Okay. Clean off my slight burr on the back. Okay, so now we're ready to do the countersinking. Okay, so now I'm switching to a larger drill bit, and I'm going to go right on the same hole and not bore all the way through, just do a little bit. That will create my little countersunk section where it's got a slight angled edge, and that will make it so all that extra rivet material, instead of doming on the top, can go flush to the surface of the metal. So now that one is ready to have the next rivet put in. It is going to be pretty much the exact same process. The difference is I don't necessarily have to worry about moving it around to create the domed shape. I can probably just go straight down. Okay. So there we have it. Because the rivet material shifted, there was a little bit more material on one side than the other, but you can see the slight difference here, or hopefully you can see. This one is the mushroomed rivet, so it's got a pronounced head, and then here's the countersunk, and it's almost completely flush with the surface. Now, because I did that countersinking, I can come back in with a file and sandpaper and actually sand that smooth. So if you were doing this in all brass or all copper or all silver, that would almost completely disappear. So for our final rivet on the sample piece, being the tube rivet, it is going to be a slightly different process that we have to use. Our material, for it being a tube, is a lot larger in diameter than our regular rivet. Specifically, this is equivalent of about a 5 gauge wire, or 3/16 of an inch. This is just a brass tube. It came as part of a telescoping tube kit that has all sorts of different sizes of tubes that can all slide into each other for easy storage. So if you want to have a variety of material to use, this is a good way to go. But my brass tube, like I said, 3/16 of an inch. So now that I have the pieces firmly together, I can drill both these holes at the same time. Instead of going straight to a 3/16 drill bit, I'm going to use the one that I did the countersinking with to basically act as a pilot hole. I'll then switch to the 3/16 to remove the extra material, simply so I don't have to take off so much material at one go. This should make it easier to do the drilling. There we go. There's my 3/16 hole, finally drilled. The rod goes into it fairly nicely. Do a little bit of cleanup on it, and we'll be ready to cut our rivet. Now I have gone and slightly, by like maybe 1/2 millimeter to 1 millimeter, expanded the length of the rivet. But it's the same process. So you put it in, you hold it tight, and you cut it off. Okay, so there we go. Put it in, make sure it's evenly spaced. Now, before you start hammering it, which you could just go and straight hammer it from here and make it work, the first thing that you want to do is you actually want to take some form of a scribe or a center punch, something like that, and put it in and try to flare the ends of the rivet with it slightly. This will help set the rivet in place and pre-curve the edges of the tube over so that when you start hammering it, it's already inclined to curve over. If you don't do this, when you go to hammer, it'll probably have a tendency to just want to squat straight down. Where you do this, and you'll get a better formed, nicer rivet. So, if you're able to see that, it's hard recording with a phone because you don't get anything like depth of field or autofocus. I've started the flaring out, so it's got the slightly flared ends on either side. So when I start doing the actual rivet, it will start to follow that shape a little bit better. Now for this one, I'm not going to use my standard riveting hammer. I'm going to use the peen end on my chasing hammer because I want it to be slightly more domed. And what I'm doing is I'm walking the hammer around that flare and just continuing to push it out. And again, you can see as I'm going, I'm flipping the piece over so that I'm striking on either side to create the rivet. Now that I have it most of the way done, I can switch back to using my regular riveting hammer with my domed end and use it for the quick finishing work. So there you have it. A sample piece that has both a mushroomed, a countersink, and a tubular rivet, all set into a single simple piece. So there you have it. That was my demo on how to make your sample piece for the 3 main types of rivets. Pretty simple. Each one, overall the same general process to make them, but each one with its slight little tweak on how you're supposed to do it. These can be used for all sorts of different applications and on all sorts of materials. What's nice about rivets is that it will allow you to join together more than just metal. You can put rivets into wood, plastic, even leather and some fabrics. The big crucial thing is that you have some form of a harder surface, like a metal or a rigid plastic, on either side of it. You could even manage to rivet together a leaf if you wanted. But you have to have, if you're setting a rivet in it, you would have to have some form of a washer to give you that hard surface for it to be sandwiched in. Like I said, I will have description or links down in the description for all the different tools I used. I will also, like the piercing demo, have a handout for a Google Doc down in the description that will give you some basic information on riveting. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along with that, and maybe some of you will give it a try and look forward to the next jewelry demo video I put together. Until then, this has been Alex with Drummer Artificer Studios. See you next time. You can put a tube rivet in one end, and that way it gives almost a bearing that you can put something through. Yeah, I ain't doing that.